Hi everyone and welcome back to Learning with Tia. In this video, we're going to go through some of the key regulatory bodies within the auditing profession. So firstly, what makes auditing a profession? Well, auditing is a profession for a number of reasons. First of all, we place reliance on an underlying theory. Now, that underlying theory is the accounting conceptual framework. It's this framework that underlies the profession of accounting and essentially guides us in what it is that we do. Remember, it's the accounting standards that are the criteria we use when we evaluate the financial report. That is the underlying theory that we rely on. Secondly, we have expertise. Now, expertise refers to the notion that we have expert knowledge, we have expert skill, and we have experience in performing the service that we are performing with competence and due care. Now, you might remember from a previous video on ethics, professional competence and due care is one of the fundamental principles under APES 110 that all accountants must comply with. The auditing profession also has the ability to sanction members and also controls who it is that can be admitted into the profession. Accountants require both educational qualifications at the postgraduate level as well as professional experience in order to gain membership into the accounting profession. Now, once they gain that membership, they have to meet certain requirements to remain admitted into the profession, and they can be suspended for breaching the codes. Now, this leads us into the next step. We have regulatory codes. We have codes governing technical areas, how we perform the audits and how we perform our roles as accountants, and that's governed by the accounting standards as well as the auditing standards. And as we've discussed before, we also have ethical codes, APES 110 being the International Code of Ethics for all professional accountants, including auditors. And as we've previously discussed when talking about APES 110, there are fundamental principles that auditors and all professional accountants must comply with, and those are the need to act with integrity, to be independent and exercise objective thought, keep information we see and receive confidential, and always place the public ahead of our own personal interest. These are the fundamental principles, and they are a crucial element of our profession and how it's perceived by society. That's why it's so incredibly important to uphold them. Now, this slide shows all of the bodies involved within the auditing profession and is trying to show the relationship and link between each of them. So let's try to decipher this together. Now, starting on the top left-hand corner, we have the three professional bodies of the accounting profession. They are Chartered Accountants ANZ. These are individuals that we refer to as CAs. We have CPA Australia. Individuals that are members of this professional body are called CPAs, and I'm one of them. And you also have IPA. IPA stands for the Institute of Public Accountants. Now, as I said, these are the professional bodies, and all professional accountants would be a member of at least one of them. Now, these bodies were the group that established the independent body known as APES-B. Now, this is the body that developed APES 110, the Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants. Now, let's jump up over to the right-hand side. Starting with the federal government of Australia, which is the legislative arm of the government, this arm developed and implemented the Corporations Act, which is the main company law that we have in Australia, as well as the ASIC Act. Now, there is a link between these two because the ASIC Act created ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. Now, it's ASIC, as you can see over here, ASIC is the body that actually enforces the Corporations Act. It's like the police, but for the Corporations Act. That's the link there. So if you want, you can actually draw a link between the ASIC Act and ASIC as well. as so. Ooh, not very well, but there you go. Now, okay. In addition to establishing ASIC, the ASIC Act also established the Financial Reporting Council. The Financial Reporting Council is the body that oversees the operation. I'll see over here, oversees the operation of AUASB. Now, we're going to be talking about this body very soon, but it's this body that issues the ASAs, the Australian Auditing Standards. They develop as well as issue the ASAs. The ASAs, the Australian Auditing Standards, it's important to know, are based on the international standards of auditing. So that's the link there. Now, we're going to be talking about that a bit later, but essentially at this point in time, it's good to know that we have what's called internationally harmonized auditing standards. What this means is our auditing standards, our Australian auditing standards, are actually based on the international auditing standards, which are called the ISAs. There are very few variations. There are some areas where the Australian standards are slightly different and more specialised for the Australian environment. But more often than not, they are very similar to the international standards of auditing. Another important link to highlight is between the Corporations Act and the ASAs. The Corporations Act actually gives the auditing standards, the ASAs, what's called force of law. What that means is they are enforceable under the Corporations Act. That is why when you read auditing standards, the language used represents sentences like the auditor must or the auditor shall do this. There are no references to wording such as may, so there's nowhere where you'll read the auditor may do this. The reason for this language of using words such as must or shall is because the ASAs are mandatory requirements that auditors must comply with when performing an audit. Finally, the ASAs, or one of the ASAs, actually also link to APES 110. Why is that? Because under the ASAs, there is a requirement for the auditor to also act in accordance to the ethical requirements as well. And as we know, that's what APES 110 is, the Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants. In summary, the key regulatory bodies are the Financial Reporting Council, FRC. Now, as we said earlier, this is the body that oversees the accounting and audit standard setting process. So they oversee the development of both the AASBs as well as the ASAs. They also monitor auditor independence as well. Now, the body that actually develops the ASAs is the Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. That's AUASB. As I said, they're responsible for the actual development of the ASAs. But as we said earlier, these are often generally based on the international standards equivalent. So that's the ASAs and the ISAs. We also have the Auditing Professional and Ethical Standards Board, APESB, and as can be determined just off that, they developed APES 110. We also have the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, which is ASIC, and ASIC is the body that administers and enforces the Corporations Act. ASIC also monitors audit firms. So what that means is it actually conducts annual inspections of the Big Four audit firms and random inspections of all other accounting and audit firms throughout the year. The reason why they perform these inspections is to ensure that auditing standards as well as quality standards are being followed. Now, where ASIC finds any breaches, they are able to fine audit firms and also bring action against them. An interesting point to also note here is that in order for an auditor to be appointed as a company auditor, they actually have to be registered with ASIC as well. A body I didn't mention earlier is the company's Auditors and Liquidators Disciplinary Board, so CALDB. Now, this body works with ASIC to hear breaches of the Corporations Act by auditors or audit firms to determine whether, right over here, determine whether a registered auditor or liquidator has failed to carry out his or her duties. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, we have internationally harmonised auditing standards. So our Australian auditing standards are based on, and in many cases, replicate the international standards. So the international standards are called ISAs over here, and they represent international standards on auditing. Now, the key groups involved in this process are the International Federation of Accountants. These are very similar to our Financial Reporting Council and Ethical Standards Board, but international. And finally, the body that is responsible for actually developing the international auditing standards are the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. That concludes our video on the key regulatory bodies involved in the auditing profession. If you have any questions, please let me know, and otherwise I will see you in class. Have a great day.